Hi, welcome back to Videos from the Ville. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, and this is Government 241, Public Administration. And on this particular video, we're going to look at a great article entitled The Study of Administration by Woodrow Wilson. Of course, this particular essay was written long before he went into the White House, but it is this essay, which I hope you have read either by this time or shortly after. This essay was written in 1887, but this essay makes Woodrow Wilson the father of American public administration. It makes him the father of public administration because no American had written systematically about the study of administration. They've all, prior to this time, all American writers were writing about political theory, they were writing about constitutions, they were writing about policy, but none of them wrote about administration per se until Wilson. So Woodrow Wilson is regarded as the father of American public administration. We find that, yes, this is exactly, you'll follow along with me, please, in your PowerPoints that I have sent to you. Well, the beginnings of administration, we've said just a moment ago, until this essay was written by Woodrow Wilson, political debate, political discussion in America always centered around what was the best constitution. The political writing of the time and discussion always was focused on the great political questions of the day. Wilson, in this article, claims that so much theorizing had gone on in this area that it was much, 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 much easier to frame a constitution than it was to run one. So the need for this new type of theorizing, looking at administration, the need for this new type of theorizing about government had become much more important, much more needed during Wilson's time because there was a growing change in our notions, new conceptions about what government should be doing in society. You find at this time, at the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, that the best writing in the world on what was happening in administration, the best writing was being done in France and being done in Germany. However, we find that writing that was done in France and Germany on administration was of limited usefulness in the United States, because what was France? What was Germany? France and Germany were, in fact, unitary forms of government. The United States, of course, was a federal form of government, and there wasn't anyone looking at administration in a federation, in a federal form of government. You find that the English-speaking peoples, as we know, are much, much more successful at curbing executive power than they are at perfecting the exercise of it. This is something that Winston Churchill writes about in his History of the English-Speaking Peoples. Wilson believes that indeed it's harder for a democracy to organize administration than it is for a monarchy. Well, of course, in a monarchy, then whatever the monarch says goes. But what is democracy about? Democracy is all about consensus. So it's far more difficult for democracies to organize administration than it is for monarchy. Well, we find that in this paper, The Study of Administration, Wilson is setting forth his belief that in light of the assassination of President James Garfield, this led to a whole new discussions of what personnel arrangements needed to be conducted needed to be in place in the federal government. Wilson felt that this reform movement that had arisen to deal with the civil service, um, that this civil service reform movement had to be broadened beyond simply establishing a civil service that would have its ranks filled with merit exams rather than patronage. He thought we had to move past personnel reform into looking at different methods of executive organization. We look at executive organization and we'll be in a better place, because what was happening, of course, all federal servants from the time of Andy Jackson. Andy Jackson doesn't eliminate government by the good or government by the gentleman altogether, but he establishes, he changes federal employment to patronage system, to the victor belong the spoils, and government of the good or government of the gentleman disappears. So at this time, you have government, federal government positions being filled through patronage, through being politics. And now with the assassination of President Garfield, we're going to establish a civil service to staff the ranks of the federal government. And in order to get those jobs, you're going to have to take a merit exam. Well, Woodrow Wilson was all for that, but he thought that it was important that we need to go above and beyond that. We need to look at methods of executive organization, as I said. When we get into the question of the dichotomy between politics and administration, here's a situation where Wilson actually believed that it existed. We don't have all that writing that was being done, that was done in the Second World War by Norton Long, for example, that helps us prove that the dichotomy actually does not exist. But at this time, it was very easy to believe that it did, and Wilson believed that it did. And he helps reinforce it through his very strong quotation, through his compelling quotation. Woodrow Wilson, in the Study of Administration, writes about the politics-administration dichotomy. He says, quote, "Administration is a part of political life only as machinery is a part of the manufactured product," unquote. Administration is a part of political life only as machinery is part of the manufactured product. So certainly the existence of the dichotomy was much more plausible during this historical period at that time. Well, Wilson also talks about accountability. And in the question of accountability, it's interesting. He believes that the greater the person's power and the more discretion that the person has to use this power, the less likely he is to abuse it. I wonder if you agree with that or if you disagree with that. We find that when people with a great deal of power do abuse it, certainly the repercussions are much greater. There are two people featured on your PowerPoint slide, one on the bottom left and one on the bottom right. The person on the bottom left is William Tweed, William Boss Tweed. He, of course, was one of the bosses of Tammany Hall, one of the bosses of the Democratic political party machine in New York City, which was so corrupt and ran the city of New York for much of the much of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And then on the right, you have who? You have Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus. I always like to ask if anyone knows who Boss Tweed is and if anyone knows who Cincinnatus is. Cincinnatus is very important, very significant in world history because George Washington was referred to as the Cincinnatus of the West. Who was Cincinnatus? Cincinnatus was a simple farmer. He was a simple farmer in the Roman Republic, but he was a great military mind and a great military leader. And so the Roman Republic had a provision in its constitution that when the country was threatened, when it was under attack, that the country could appoint one person to be a dictator, a military leader. And the Etruscan tribe did invade the Roman Republic at least twice during Cincinnatus's life. And at least twice, Cincinnatus was given full dictatorial powers, and he organized and led Roman armies against the Etruscans, vanquished them, and he immediately put down his weapons, resigned his commissions, and went back to his farm to begin farming. Here was a man who was not infatuated with power, who just simply wanted to do a good job, help his country, and then go back to his life. And this is what essentially George Washington wanted to do, of course, after the Revolutionary War. He just wanted to go back to Mount Vernon. He never expected to be called back to lead the Constitutional Convention and then to be the first president. He was indeed the Cincinnatus of the West. What do you guys think? Is it true? Do you think Wilson is right? The greater the person's power and the more discretion that they have to use that power, that the less likely they are to abuse it? Well, certainly in today's world, they'll get a lot more press coverage if they abuse it. I don't know that I can agree with Wilson here myself, and I don't know I can disagree with it. All public servants are different. All people are different, and it makes it hard to make a generalization here. Certainly what many people talk about when you get into this discussion is, for example, perhaps President Nixon and his situation in regard to Watergate. And they therefore would not agree with Woodrow Wilson in this case. But it's something to think about, and certainly we always must be concerned about and maintain accountability for our public officials in their dealings with us. Okay? Well, if you have any questions about Woodrow Wilson's piece, his essay, or his other writings, give me and shoot me an email or send me a text message or give me a phone call or a FaceTime. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Okay.